Without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce our keynote speaker today, Will Aycock. He's the general manager of Project Greenlight. Deep ties to North Carolina. He's got an education both on the western side of the state at App State and the eastern part of the state at East Carolina. He's been leading efforts in Wilson to do really dramatic things to provide for a smaller community, but to demonstrate that just because it's a smaller community does not mean that it's a community that is devoid of technology, that is behind in providing for citizens, developing platforms and services and things that are inclusive, that enable everyone to participate, and they have some really new efforts I'm sure we'll talk about that are going to drive even more collaboration both within his region and greater across the country, to be quite honest. So without further ado, please, Will Aycock.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with you today. Before I get started, I feel obligated to make a couple of disclaimers and point out a couple of things that I would be thinking if I was sitting in your shoes right now. The first is, Wilson's got a story to tell, but that's a pretty unique story, right? They've done some things that really aren't possible for others. And I would like to argue that that's not really true. Don't focus so much on some of the details of how we did things, but rather what we've done. Because I'd argue that most everything we're working on are issues that all communities face to some extent, and that every community has some power to influence. So, just kind of level setting this conversation that way, hopefully to open up the conversation we're going to have. The other thing is that, we in Wilson make no claim that we have everything figured out. And when we're talking about digital inclusion, I think that is absolutely true. We are absolutely aware of these issues. We are taking intentional steps to work on them. But I would not claim that we have it all figured out. I'm just here to tell you guys a story of what we're doing, and hopefully spark some thoughts that can help us all to collaborate and to work together on these issues. Because I think a lot of times, some of these things are really in the beginning stages of how do we work on these issues within our community. A little bit about Greenlight, for those of you who may not be aware. Greenlight is the City of Wilson's fiber-to-the-home utility. So we provide broadband infrastructure and services to essentially every aspect of our community. We're talking community anchor institutions, major employers, residents, small offices, nonprofits. We run the gamut. And we've been doing this for a little over 11 years now. We have about 10,000, closing in on 11,000 active external customers. And you might ask, well, why is Wilson doing this? And to understand that, some of you have probably heard this before, you do need to understand the history of Wilson. So Wilson is a community that believes in itself and a community that believes in its people and understands that our people are the most important asset that we have. So there's this very long history of investment and intentional leadership to try to grow the economy of Wilson. It goes back to the electric distribution infrastructure built in the late 1880s, the natural gas system in the early 1900s, more recently the water system, the Buckhorn Reservoir that was built in the 1990s, ultimately leading to Greenlight. So why specifically did Wilson make this investment in infrastructure? And part of that was because of the needs of our own organization. In managing these other utilities, our community leaders could see more than a decade ago, now back almost 15, 16 years ago, that the future was going to be around automation. The future was going to be around, remote management of these assets. And when I started my career in 1999, the city of Wilson, the networks that were available at that time were insufficient even for the technologies of the day. And so we understood that to move the community forward, to continue to manage the assets that we already had deployed, we had to invest in infrastructure. So that was one of the threads of the story of how we got here and how I'm in front of you today. Another important thread to that story was our local business leaders who came to us as we were making the investment in infrastructure. They came to us and said, hey, we want to be a part of that. We see the same needs in this community that you see. So can you make that investment in a way that we can take advantage of it? And we were able to do that through partnership with most of the major employers, with the businesses within our community. So those are two of the reasons, and those are probably the two reasons that we speak about most often of why we made this investment in infrastructure. But there was another reason that we made the investment that was at least as important in the decision making of our council, and that was the idea that we did not want our community to be left behind. Not necessarily that Wilson should always be the leading community, but rather we don't want to fall behind. And we understand the importance of these technologies. And so implicit in that idea of the community not being left behind is this idea that our people, that no one should be left behind. And so all these things drove this investment in infrastructure within Wilson. And so now to sort of get into this topic that we've been asked to talk about today of digital inclusion, the first thing I'd like to say is that digital inclusion is an action or set of actions in response to a condition, right? And the condition is a condition of divide, of inequity, of access, or, of being able to take advantage of certain technologies. And that, difference in access and in taking advantage of these technologies can be driven by a lot of things. It can certainly be driven by race. It can be driven by income. It can be driven by geography, by rural or urban. It can be driven by disability. It can be driven by, so many factors, by age. So all these things play into, and no one is causal, and no one explains it all, but these are all factors that can absolutely influence the level of inclusion, the level of access, the level of which people are taking advantage of these technologies. And so since I lifted this directly from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, I will explicitly reference them. It's on their website, and say that, according to the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, digital inclusion involves the steps taken to ensure that all individuals and communities have access to and use of information and communication technologies, okay? So this is one of the core missions of Greenlight at the City of Wilson. When we were established, we were given 3 missions. We are to support the economic health of our community, we are to help improve the quality of life of our citizens, and we are to help drive efficiency and improve the delivery of our other city services. And so that economic health and that quality of life directly go to these issues of digital inclusion within Wilson. So some of the areas, some of the requisite parts of an inclusivity strategy include access to affordable and robust broadband. And this is, clearly the area in Wilson where we have probably done the most. It is absolutely the area in which we have made the most investment. So we have invested over $35 million in a fiber to the home network that very importantly passes every single address within our community. So there was an intentional decision by council that said we're not going to do a piecemeal cost-benefit analysis of deployment, right? We're not going to look area by area and decide how we're going to invest in infrastructure. We believe as a community the infrastructure is essential to the health of all, so we're going to make sure that it is available to all. And that first concept of availability was about building it to every address. And so that was done now probably 12 years ago going on. So that was the first part of the story. We're building, we're providing access, we think we've done a fantastic thing, and there was absolutely some benefit derived. However, as time went by, we began to see a disparity. And that disparity could be seen in the penetration rates within our community. Okay, so if you've heard me talk before, you know that right now we're about 40% market penetration. There's an aside to that, which is we base market based on utility passing, so we're probably a little bit more than that. But anyway, let's say that we're 40% of people that have access to the service taking advantage of it. But that average masks some really interesting and impactful numbers, okay? There are areas within our community, there are neighborhoods where we have 80+% penetration. So 80+% of the people in the community, in the neighborhood, have adopted the service. And I would argue that when you're getting to 80%, you're probably basically at 100% of the true market potential within that neighborhood, right? So we've got places where almost everyone in the neighborhood is utilizing the service. Then, when we first started really digging into this issue, we had places that were less than 10%. And so we started looking at it, and, in complete transparency, you could absolutely see that the driving factor between the 80% and the less than 10% was income-based. There's just no question about it. And it mirrored many other patterns that we saw within our community. These issues are not issues purely of digital inclusion, but that's what we'll be talking about today. But we start thinking, okay, we've been given a mission, right? We've been given a mission to include everyone. We intentionally invested, and we've got this disparity. What can we do? And to the theme of partnerships, we immediately started thinking, we got to get some other folks involved here, because clearly we need some help. And one of the first things that we did was we went and we sat down with our public housing authority, and we developed a partnership with them, a bulk contract. So the housing authority is our customer, and their residents can opt into, so it's not mandatory, but can opt into an extremely low cost, cutting edge broadband service as part of their agreement with Wilson Housing Authority. And through that, we began to see dramatic improvement in adoption rates within the housing authority, within their public housing developments. So, we saw that, but we realized it wasn't enough. And also, there's more to come about that partnership because there were multiple facets to it, but I'll try to stay on track with the outline that has been so graciously provided for me. But my friend Rebecca Agner down there. So, still, we realized we didn't have enough, we weren't making enough impact. So what more do we need to do? Where else do we need to look, to have an impact on this adoption rate? And one of the things we really realized was our business practices, okay? So our business policies were problematic. People would come to us, and they could theoretically afford the monthly fee for the service, but we were denying service because of credit history, because of bad payment, because of previous issues they had had in consuming services, either with us or someone else. So what do we do about this? Well, we're a technology-centric organization, and we've got all these applications out there. What can we do? We can implement a prepay program, okay? So it completely removes any necessity for deposits, for credit checks, for any type of creditworthiness. You simply charge the account, dividing the amount to a daily amount, so a little bit more than $1 a day for broadband access. Once installed, people can let the service go off as they want to. And when they need it again, they can simply recharge at whatever level they desire, and they can turn the service back on. And it really takes a target market we weren't reaching and turns them into one of our best customer sets now because they're completely self-sufficient. They are managing this on their own, which is really a win-win for all of us. So we have seen some positives out of that. I will say that we have not solved this by any stretch. There are other issues in this adoption that go to trust that we are just on the front end of really starting to talk about, and we've got to uncover that. But we have had a measurable impact. We have gone from areas where we have less than 10%, and now we talk about it, we're less than 20%, less than 30%. So we're making progress and measurable progress, but we're not there. Another one of the key components of inclusion is being able to get devices that are appropriate in the hands of the people that need them. And I will be frank, this is probably one of the areas where we as Greenlight have done the least and are weakest. But luckily we have community partners who have stepped in and have done a lot of good work. So our school system has one-to-one technology. They are providing devices to students. They're able to go home and take advantage of that in their homes in coordination with the programs that we are offering. I will also say that, in these issues, the community works with anyone. There is a fantastic program between Wilson, the school system, and Sprint where they are taking, basically hotspots home and helping there. So this is an all-in, everybody together effort across the community, and we welcome all partners to work on these issues. So in addition to that, we've got a lot of players in the community, nonprofits such as Save a Youth, St. John CDC, our library, all providing computer labs where there's access to technology. And also we provide free broadband at all those computer labs. So again, trying to slowly chip away at this. One of the other things that we've realized is that, the mobile devices, which I left mine down there so I can't hold it up, but that's another important part of access to devices, and wanting to make sure that we've got affordable access to mobile within the community is important. So we've developed a partnership with the Republic Wireless, which is a local North Carolina firm, where they are actually providing low-cost wireless service in coordination with us at the City of Wilson to our residents. And we are also looking to expand that partnership into other areas of our smart city efforts. Because when you're talking about smart city, there's no one network that meets everything's needs, right? You're going to have a mixture of all technologies, which I'm sure everybody else will talk about today. So we want to build those partnerships to make sure that we have inclusivity of all technologies in our smart city portfolio. Also, our housing authority has worked in partnership with the Camden Institute. They are one of many institutions out there working on this issue of access to devices. I can't speak to the work they've done other than to say I know it's good work, and they've worked constructively in Wilson and I'm sure in many of your other communities. So, there are resources out there. Another really key aspect of this is digital literacy training. So that's, again, a partnership with the Housing Authority where we have provided staff. They also had a partnership with Camden where they actually came in and did training for residents of public housing, and that was a train the trainer program. So now that has extended beyond the initial sort of engagement and is continuing forward in public housing. I'll also say that in terms of digital literacy training, probably 3 weeks ago, we had the best technology event I have ever participated in Wilson, and it was eye-opening to me. So the community college came to us and said, we would like to do a cybersecurity event. Everyone talks about these issues. Everyone is really interested in how they can understand this, take steps to be safe and secure in what they're doing, what their households are doing. And so, we said, sure, we will be happy to partner. We will sponsor. We will do anything we can to help you put that event together. And we've tried to do community outreach events before, just as Greenlight. And usually it ends up in a room with, 10 or 15 people, and we have some really great engaging conversations one-on-one where we can answer somebody's questions in detail. So nice, but not potentially very impactful in terms of the audience reached, right? I assumed when we were doing this program with the community college, I'd show up for the same thing. Couldn't find a place to park. There was no room in the facility. It was the most diverse and engaged audience I had seen brought together to discuss technology in my 20 years working in technology in the City of Wilson. There were technology professionals from large employers. There were grandmothers with grandchildren. There was just every walk of life in there, all interested around this common theme. And what was so impressive about that to me was the amount of engagement, the questions. We had a hard schedule of 2 hours. We could have been there for 2 days answering people's questions. So I point this out to say that, don't be blind, as I was before that event, to the resources that already exist. The community college system is fantastic. And, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but when there is success, I will jump on it, and we will be doing more with the community college for sure to try to deploy more of these trainings into our community. Another aspect of this is quality technical support. So if you want to be inclusive, you have to meet people where they are. What you're seeing here, it doesn't look particularly welcoming, but that's our Unified Communications Center. So in Wilson, if you need anything other than fire and police for emergency services, you call these people. So these are the same people that you're reporting potholes to, and they're the ones that are helping you troubleshoot broadband. And they're right there in our community. They're all locals. Most of them people that have come through, sort of the talent development pipeline of Wilson. And again, we're able to connect directly with our customers and our citizens because it's not that intimidating technical support person. It's the person that you talk to for most all your needs related to interacting in our community. And we feel like that's made it more accessible. I wish I had a picture of the many times that people from the community show up with brownies and biscuits and all other things to show their appreciation for the technical support and the service that they're receiving there. Or the pictures of people coming and sitting down in the break room with our employees, not because there's some problem with the service we provide, but rather because they got a new tablet and they need some help. And the people in here say, hey, yeah, that's cool. Come by. I'll be on break at 9:15. I got you. So that community engagement, that welcomeness, I think is really important from the perspective of technical support. Another aspect of this is trying to build tools that allow people to be self-sufficient. Clearly, prepay is an example of that. Also, we are very intentional and very fortunate in Wilson. We have a leadership team that is engaged in this. So in all our projects, we work really hard to try to make sure we're thinking about how can we make sure it's accessible and accessible in multiple ways to multiple audiences. We want people to be able to self-serve through technology while also never limiting their access to a human being. And one of the things that I would say is probably a best practice, if there's anything in here that I would really strongly recommend, is that we have developed the understanding that communication or technology projects are almost always communications projects. And most communications projects have a technology element. And so I pointed out Rebecca Agner, who I like to think of as the co-founder, the two of us working together on all these issues in our community. And so we've intentionally made that connection, right? And so we collaborate on everything. So we're thinking about the technology and we're thinking about the communication strategy to intentionally deliver this to the full breadth of our citizenry. Again, not perfect. There is so much to do, but working on things through that lens, I think, is really impactful. And then just an example of some of the ways that, from a smart city perspective, we realize that smart cities are network cities. It's not just the technology networks, it's the people networks. So making sure we're collecting data from our citizens through the way we design things. So what, right? Okay, you just told me a little bit about what the elements are and what you're doing. How have you seen economic benefit? How have you driven economic development through this? And there are several answers to the question. One of which is that we have seen new businesses form around these programs, and we have seen new ideas for how we do things evolve out of these programs. So one example is our accident recreation unit. So traffic enforcement folks, when there's a major accident, used to bring the big red truck out, send the ladder up, take the pictures all around. Now they're using drones for a lot of that data collection, and that grew out of these efforts. The company that developed that showed up at our first meetup. And they had an idea, and that idea has become a company now. So that is one example of how these investments and strategies have borne out. We're also seeing increased efficiency from a really simple perspective. By deploying these technologies, we can be more intelligent in the way we route work, which increases efficiencies, driving down the cost of service and improving the quality of life of our citizens, making sure that when they get out there that things are clean, things have been serviced, that, we're there. Again, everything a work in progress. I'm very conscious of that, but we've seen those benefits begin to materialize. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier prepay and the value we brought on the broadband side. But that same technology has been deployed in our other utilities. So if you can imagine now people that had trouble accessing utility services in the past, specifically electric utility, right? And they had problems with credit worthiness. We're now, through the prepay program, allowing them to get access to the service without a deposit, and we're setting up a program by which, as they pay and charge the account, they can have the option of a small portion of that payment going to pay down bad debt, previously owed amounts, to help them build their credit worthiness with us, right? So that's helping people to build themselves back up through that deployment of technology. Also importantly, through these technologies, we're giving access to data to our citizens and people so that now, we can show people how they are consuming. And over time, the intent there is to help people as they learn how to understand consumption habits, understand how that translates to expenditure, and then begin to manage their household more efficiently. All things that we are working on today. There are other ways that we have seen sort of this derive economic benefit one of which is through investment. Because we have deployed the infrastructure ubiquitously, people can invest with confidence and know that they will not be in a situation anywhere in our community where if they choose to invest in a certain area, they're not going to have access to the infrastructure that is required. We've also seen, especially in the rural areas, people who were previously not able to do remote work now getting remote work jobs because the infrastructure was previously not available, not sufficient to allow them to have those jobs, and now they can have those jobs. So we've seen that bear out. One of my favorite examples is a personal example of my father, who was 70 plus years old, semi-retired. He's now involved in the gig economy. He has learned how to pick up side jobs through an online application that's for fee appraisers, and it's shocking to me, to see people embrace these technologies as they become more comfortable with it in our community. And then we brought in new opportunities, the picture here from our hackathon, where we're exposing children in Wilson to things that have been available in other parts for a long time, but they hadn't been where we are. And so we're starting to move in that direction, and more to come on that. We've also seen some unexpected benefits. So we have found that through the ability to live stream and provide robust Wi-Fi at our facilities, that's a requirement for some of the recruiting for large tournaments, bringing more than $5 million tourist revenue annually into the community. So we're helping there. And we've got a new esports program that is starting at Barton College, local college in the community. Obviously, Greenlight's the primary sponsor of that. And, we hope to increase our sports tourism into esports. We're working on that. Pretty confident we won't break the internet in Wilson. Hope. If we do, it's my fault. But all those things are driving new opportunities within our community. Okay, tie this all together, right? Why? Well, the why goes back to our greatest resource, which is absolutely our people. And so what we are intentionally working on is a pipeline to develop, cultivate, and retain our people. Right? So we want to start at the youngest age with our police athletic league, with our summer programs, with our nonprofits. We want to expose our children, all of our children, to these concepts of technology and entrepreneurship and digital literacy so they can be prepared for the workforce. And we want to, and hopefully be prepared to be founders. And we want to then take that into our educational system. The Wilson Academy of Applied Technology is a wonderful program partnership between Wilson County Schools and, again, the community college, who I'm a huge, huge fan of, obviously. That actually gives kids coming out of high school an associate's degree, the certifications they need for local employment for the jobs that already exist today. And, the picture here, if you were paying close attention, the gentleman on the left was in a picture earlier in this slide deck. At the community college event where we discussed cybersecurity, that young gentleman who came through Watt, who was an intern in our organization last summer, is now on the stage as an expert in cybersecurity in Wilson, sharing with his community, right? That's why, okay? And it's just a proof case of one, but we're early into this, but I can tell you, when you have those experiences, right, it makes a huge difference. Right now, it makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck again, right? Because it matters. It truly does. Even with all that, we're not there yet. There are still things that must be done. There are still assets, and nothing is complete. Not one thing in this presentation is completed. These are all works in progress, but it doesn't mean we don't keep going and moving forward, right? And so what's next is our partnership with Riot, because there are programs such as the Accelerator program that they have been putting on that need to come into Eastern North Carolina, need to come into Wilson, need to be exposed and made accessible to a broader audience of people. So I am thrilled that we're going to be working in partnership to begin recruiting for the first cohort of the Riot Accelerator program in Wilson in the coming weeks. I hope if any of you have ideas for people who might be good candidates that you will steer them our way. And we're going to keep going, right? And hopefully we'll come back to some presentation at some future event. And the next story that will make the hair stand up on the back of my neck is something that comes out of this partnership. So even with all that, right, it's just so monumental what we're talking about here today. We're still not there, and we have to keep building the partnerships and working together. So we are building a physical space, which will be called the Gig East Exchange, and a program of work called Gig East around that, meetups, convenings. Our Accelerator partnership is part of that, to continue to bring people together, to have these discussions, to generate the ideas, to have more opportunity like this where somebody in this audience is going to get up, hopefully, and tell me, well, you missed it on this, you're full of whatever on that. Those are the dialogues that we really got to get going, because that's how we're going to move things forward. And we're hopeful that this will absolutely be a space to bring that together. And then the final thought I have is the title was something to the effect of how is digital inclusion driving economic development? There's no difference. When you look at it, what do we talk about today, right? We talked about infrastructure investment and talent development. That's it, How is that different? How are these fundamental, concepts of digital inclusion different from the concepts of economic development? I don't think they're very different at all. It's just how we view them and how we talk about them. Ultimately, we're talking about putting infrastructure in the ground, giving access to people, and allowing them to take advantage of it. So with that, I will say thank you very much for the time today. It's been a pleasure.
We've got time for just a couple of questions from the audience.
Hi, I have a question. In terms of your funding that you received, could you kind of give it a breakdown, like how much of it is like from taxes, how much of it is from corporations, how much of it is from grants, just as a kind of overview?
Are you talking about, you say funding?
Funding for what you're doing.
Oh, so 100% of the infrastructure investment came from COP, certificates of participation, which is basically like a bond. It's a type of funding instrument, right? So we, many, many years ago, took out those essentially, funds, and we are now 3 years away from having them completely retired, and that will be a momentous day for me personally, but that's how we got started. And since then, in terms of funding, it's not easy. I mean, you work yourself into the ground trying to make sure that you make it all come out right at the end every year, but that's how we've done it. We borrowed the funding up front, we've been paying it back slowly, and we've been working to cash flow things off of the revenues generated within the community.
You talked a lot about the education in the schools, and I was very impressed by that. And do they have like cyber training and digital literacy? At what grades do they actually start that? Is it like middle school or?
No, sir. That's starting in the elementary school, and I think it starts as early as kindergarten, where there's some access to technology. My wife's a school teacher. It has worked, I think, in every school in the county just about, so she talks to me about the trials and tribulations of elementary digital inclusion and literacy training.
Cool. Last question back here.
Have you worked with other municipalities who would like to follow your model?
We work with other municipalities all the time, and we have helped with design of networks and application, sort of sharing of what we've done with applications. So yes, we do, and we're always open to helping really anybody that's interested.
Who's the person to contact?
So you can start with me. My name is Will Aycock, and then from there, we obviously have a big team of people. I'll get you in touch with the right person depending on the question.
Will again.
Thank you.